Now, I don't know if this is just a me thing, but for me personally, the biggest challenge that I have found so far with game development is lighting. And more specifically, I'm talking about dynamic lights in Unreal Engine. Now, dynamic lighting, for those of you guys who don't know, basically means that you have a light source or sometimes multiple light sources that might change in position, change in direction, change in their intensity, change in their color, or in some cases just kind of disappear and reappear at will. Now, oftentimes this isn't really a huge problem, right? If you're talking especially mobile hardware, or if you're talking desktop hardware, this will honestly work just fine. However, when we're targeting platforms like the Quest 2, Quest 3, or any other mobile device, we're often limited by the number of dynamic lights that we can use. Now, fortunately, I have found a single trick that can actually make this process a little easier and can allow for you to fake dynamic lighting to a certain extent. There's a few limitations I'll talk about as we get further into the video. But I want to show you guys how exactly I've gone about doing this and how you guys can duplicate this for your own project. And if it's done correctly, can even add a little bit of extra polish to your project as well by changing the style of the game overall. With that, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button down below. And with that, let's jump right into the video. Now, before we get too far into this, I first off wanted to take a second to kind of show you guys some of the limitations behind this lighting system, but also some of the reasons why I decided to use this. Now, obviously the first main reason that I decided to use this is simply because we're often limited by the number of dynamic lights that we can use in Unreal Engine, especially when we're talking about mobile hardware. When we're talking about the Quest 2 and Quest 3, there's actually a limited number of light sources that we're able to support, at least according to their documentation. This number might not be exact for every piece of hardware that you're trying to support, might be more or less. For example, the Quest 2 or the Quest 3, I haven't actually tested the limitation of dynamic lights that the Quest 2 can use for myself, but the documentation does at the very least list a limitation for us. But obviously, aside from that, using this method, we can actually create materials that are a little bit more optimized because we actually end up using unlit materials. I'll show you guys how that actually works here in a second. But let's first talk about some of the limitations as well behind using this material. Now, you guys might be somewhat familiar with this. This is actually the project I've been working on for a little while, Altered Visions. And I have shown this in my last tutorial. I've shown a few shots of it on Instagram, TikTok, other things like that. This is actually all using fake dynamic lighting technique. None of this is using Unreal Engine to actually, their point lights, their directional lights, anything like that. This is all faked. None of this is actually the light sources that Unreal Engine comes pre-installed with. As you can see, in my opinion, I think it leads to a very interesting and unique style overall for my game specifically. Okay, obviously you can kind of tell that this isn't using the standard lighting, point lights or anything like that Unreal Engine offers. And I think that's actually kind of a good thing. I kind of like this style personally. It looks a little less realistic, and that's pretty much what I was going for with this style. Now, a few limitations. First off, as you can see, if we look close to the poles and things like that, there are no shadows whatsoever. That's going to be the first limitation that you're going to run into this. I know that for some people that might be kind of a deal breaker for you if you're dealing with dynamic lights. And that's completely understandable. Some people like having their shadows. But like I said, I still think that this style looks really, really nice. Unfortunately, I don't know of any way to add in a fake dynamic lighting on top of an unlit material since they're not supposed to receive shadows. If anybody happens to know any different, let me know in the comments. But that's going to be one limitation. The only other limitation that I've come across with so far with this, I can actually show you right over here. The other limitation has to do with lights bleeding through walls. Now, this kind of ties into our no shadows thing, but because of the way that this light source actually works, we basically have a point in space that acts as our point light's position. This can also be modified to use a directional light, by the way. And basically it kind of goes out against everything that has this material. And if a face is facing this light, it will light up that face of the mesh accordingly. And obviously that leads to things like this, where we're getting a light source against things like this, this little cryopod here when the light source is on the other side of the wall, which isn't ideal, I will say. We also see it a little bit on the floor. I unfortunately, again, haven't found a better way to get through this other than maybe setting up multiple different materials, each one with a specific point light, bound to it. I've kind of decided to just kind of settle with this because well, yes, it's noticeable. I don't think it's as bad as it could be. And I think it'll work all right for my game specifically. But that's going to be kind of your main issue. Just kind of has to do with the fact there's no shadows, so it's going to bleed through walls. You might end up not quite, with the style you're looking for, simply because of that no shadows. But that's going to be kind of your only limitation with this method. All right, so I think I've talked about this enough. Let's go ahead and talk about and show you how I actually set this up. All right, so let's go ahead. I'm gonna go and break down how this is all working. So I've gone ahead and opened up my test level for this project. This project does actually have a directional light in it. We won't actually be using that. I really just had that in here for testing. I wasn't real focused on the designs and everything when I was working on this test level, just the coding part of it. But this is going to be the level we're going to use to test this. Okay, so I've got this sphere here. We're going to apply our material to this sphere. Now, first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to create a new material. I'm going to call this mat underscore, we'll call it point light. I just keep it nice and simple. Obviously, you can keep this wherever you have in your project. I actually have a materials folder that I keep this in. I personally recommend having a materials folder. That's typically how I organize things. And then also, just so we don't have to come back in here to apply this later and we don't forget, I'm also going to create a dynamic instance of this. Let me go and save that real quick. I'm going to apply this to our sphere. This is just going to appear, I believe, black by default. Maybe not, maybe it's going to stay this. It doesn't really matter. So let's go ahead and open up the original, the non-instance version of this. So we're opening up our standard material. And there's going to be a couple things that we're going to want to do in here. First off, we're going to come over here and we're going to want to set this to unlit. Okay, we won't be using the default lit. I also like changing this from opaque to masked in case I decide to have any sort of... mask doesn't really end up with translucency. It basically just kind of gives you a solid crop around a certain shape. For example, if you have an alpha, anything, I think it's above 0.5 will get cropped out. Anything below 0.5 will remain as part of the material. This is kind of optional. You don't have to leave this as masked. I'll go and flip it back to opaque just because we're not going to be doing any sort of masking or anything for this video at least, but it does have its uses. And if you're planning on doing any sort of translucency, that's one way. Obviously, you can also switch it to translucent if you like. I think masked usually looks a little bit better, but little bit of talking there. All right, so now that we're in our material, we're going to need a couple things. First off, we're going to set up a couple of the inputs that we're going to be using. The first one is going to be a vector, I think it's parameter. Vector parameter. There we go. All right, and we're going to actually need a couple of these. So the first one I'm going to call light source position. Okay, this is going to be the position in our world that this light source is emanating from. I'm going to leave this at 0, 0, 0, 0. And the main reason for this is because I know where this is in our level. Obviously, you're going to want to change this to wherever your light source actually is. So that's going to be the first one we're going to need. The next one we're going to need is we're also going to need a color. I'm actually going to call this light source color. This one is also optional. Light source color, all it's going to do is it's going to allow for us to add a bit of a color to, god dang it, this little side window keeps opening. This is going to allow for us to add sort of a color on top if we want some of our light sources to have a certain color. For example, if you have a fire, I like to add like a red or an orange-y color to it on top of the material. It just kind of adds a nice little color there. All right, and the last one we want to add in is going to be our scalar parameter. Again, this one's kind of optional. You can kind of leave this one in if you'd like. I'm going to, this is basically going to be for our brightness, how far out this light source is going to affect, and how it's going to look on those distant objects. I'm going to increase this value actually. We'll increase it to 1,000. There we go. We can go and save that there. Perfect. All right, now let's go ahead and focus on actually putting together the main, portion of this material. So first off, we're going to want to do a couple more things. Let's go ahead and grab our absolute. Maybe it's not called absolute. Is it just called? It is just called world position. Okay. So we're going to want to grab our world position first off. This is just going to tell us the world position of our current. I believe it's our current vertex, if I recall. Excuse me if I get some of these wrong. I'm not the most skilled with materials, but I definitely do my best here. Okay. We're going to take this. And we're actually going to subtract it from our world position right over here, and we also want to grab the distance. We're actually going to have a bit of two different sort of paths going on here. So let me see if I can remember. Where is it? I think you might have to scroll down. Yeah, here it is. Utility right there. And we also want to grab the distance between these two positions as well. I'm going to go and format some of this a little bit. All right. Once we have this, let's go ahead. I'm going to move this down for a second. Let's focus on this branch first. So once we have our subtraction here, the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to normalize this. And then we're going to want to grab a dot product. Go ahead and our B for our dot product is actually going to be our vertex normal world space. And then once we have that, we actually want to multiply this value by -1, saturate this, and then I'm going to go ahead and add a multiply node here. B is going to be for the second branch that we're going to be building off of our distance here, but I just want to kind of organize this a little bit, so I'm going to go into F there just to kind of do it. We're going to end up doing a little bit more after this, but just to kind of help see where we're at right now, I just want to make sure everything's formatted. All right. Let me move these a little further out of the way. Now going down here to our distance. Our distance, we're going to need to do a couple things here as well. First off, we're going to want to divide this value, and the value we're actually going to divide by is going to be our brightness down here. So let me bring this up. Put that right there in our divide. Then we want to saturate this value as well. And we want to 1 minus this saturation that we get here. And this is going to go into our multiply node here. Okay? And we should end up with something that looks a little like that. You can kind of ignore the material we've got going on up here. This isn't going to look quite right. It'll look a little bit better once we actually have this in our level. All right. So we have basically the main portion down. Now, I actually like to take this a couple steps further. Okay, there's a couple things that I like to add on. First off, like I mentioned, I like to add color, okay? Again, this is optional. You don't need to do this, but I like doing this because sometimes you have an instance where maybe you want to add a little bit of color from a specific light source. This can just add a little bit of color on top of whatever texture you're using. It just makes it look a little bit nicer, okay? So we can go ahead. This is going to be really easy. All we're going to do is we're going to multiply this value by our light source color. And this is going to go right into that emissive color there. Okay. And that's really going to be about it. That's like the main portion of this material. It's actually very simple to do. Now, I actually like to take this just one step further because we have a couple parameters here. I'm going to show you guys something too, a little tip that I found while working with materials. If we open up our instance, you'll actually see we have our brightness, light source color, and our light source position. If you worked with materials, this should be pretty clear to you. This actually wasn't something I was super aware of before I started doing a lot of work with materials. But I actually like adding this all into categories. So what I'm actually going to do, that's the wrong thing, is you can actually change the group name. So I'll call this one light source. I'm just going to call these all light source real quick, just to show you. And we can actually group these all together in our parameter groups here, which I think is just nice. I think it just makes it look a little better. Now, just for a frame of reference, this is actually my origin point right here. I can actually show you. If I bring up this light source here, you'll actually see we're 50 above the z-axis there. You might notice at the moment we don't see anything. That's perfectly fine. I'm aware that we don't see anything. The reason we don't see anything is because we have our light source colors being just solid black, okay? Which means that basically the area that we're lighting up is going to be solid black. So I'm going to go and grab our instance here for a second. We're going to mess around with this a little bit. If we open up our instance, come right on over here to our light source color. I can make this a nice solid white, and you'll see that we actually do get our light source right there. We can see if I start moving this around, this way, you'll see that we basically have our light source coming in from the center point. I can move it over here, move it further up. It's always going to come from that position. And the further away I move it, you'll actually see, let me turn off my snapping for a second. Further away I move it, you'll actually see that that light source actually gets brighter and darker as you get closer and further from that light source position, which is really nice. And I can actually show you too, if we turn up our brightness, turn up this brightness here, you can actually see it brightens up from that direction as well. We'll revert that back to our 1000 that we had it at there originally. We can also adjust our light source position as well. So if I wanted to move this a little further away, you can see it's kind of hard to visualize. I'll actually use the B. So it's supposed to be our R is our X, our G is our Y, and our B is our Z. So if I actually move this up and down, you can actually kind of see that we're getting this light source moving up and down. Let me move this a little closer. I can show you a little clearer. So if I go and move this up, you can actually see that that light source position is moving up and down as well. This should be, I think, further and closer. No, this is going to be our left and our right. Okay, so we get our left and our right values there on our G, and our X is going to be our forward and our back. I should note if something goes into the light source, so let me revert this all back here for a second. Let me get this position real quick. Let me put this to a nice position that I can easily remember. So if I put this, so we have this position at negative 250 on the X, 0 on the Y, and B on our 250. Not B. I've been doing this quite a bit. So if I go ahead, let me see if I've got these values right. Do that, and then our B is 250. You'll actually see we get a solid black. If our light source position is within the mesh, we do get a solid black. We unfortunately do not get any sort of light source value. It has to be outside of the mesh somewhere. So you can see if I move it further up, we get it. If I move it further down, we get it. But not if the light source position is within the mesh. Now, one last thing I'm going to show you as well, or two last things I'm going to show you as well, is I want to show you how you can apply your own texture on top of this, what it's going to look like. I also want to show you something I like to do, and that's going to be to clamp the value. So I'll show you clamping the value first. So what I like to do is I like to take this final value, I like to clamp it. I usually like to clamp it somewhere between like 0.1 or 0.05. I'll do 0.1 just for example. I think I hit the wrong button. The only reason I like doing this is I don't really like, I keep getting this window on my left side. I don't really like having it do pitch black on the side that is away from the light source. I like having just a little bit of light, especially because if anything is too far away from light source where it's not at all lit, I think it's just way too dark. You're not going to see it. And I just don't like that myself. I'm actually going to take this and actually bring it down a little bit. We'll do 0.05. I think 0.05 is what I usually use. And 0.05, to be fair, is still plenty dark in my opinion. And like I said, you don't need to clamp it. It's completely optional. I just like clamping it because I think it looks a little bit better. Now, if you want to add your own texture on top of this, we can actually add in a texture sample. I'm actually going to convert this to a parameter real quick. Okay, we'll call it texture, and I'm also going to add this to a group real quick. And adding a texture is actually very simple. All we're going to do is we're going to take our RGB value, and we're going to multiply this RGB value by whatever our final value is off of this point light that we have here. So I take that, plug that in. It's going to air out just for a second because I don't have any texture assigned to it. Let me find just some that I can apply to it real quickly. Let's do... I want to find some that actually has like some sort of detail to it or something. Let's do... there's one specifically I was looking for, but I'm not seeing it. Oh, here, we'll do this one. What does this one look like? I think this one might look good. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. So the kind of like a sort of dirt concrete texture, somewhere like that. So we can actually take this same deal, you know, as we move it further and closer, that's going to affect our light source here. So I can move it further, it gets darker. I can move it closer, it gets brighter. And we can still mess around with the color as well. So if I actually take this color, we can make it look a little bit more red, for example, which I think looks really nice. It does obviously not do anything towards the non-lit part of the shadow. That's kind of to be expected, given that's not lit, but we can like fully adjust the light position of our color. I really like the way that this looks. I think it looks really nice. Just kind of being able to adjust it this way. Now, if you want to add in more light sources, that is possible. It is going to add to the complexity of your material just a little bit. But basically all you're going to do is you're going to multiply all these. And if I recall correctly, I actually have this opened as a backup here. You can actually start adding in multiple light points into this value in order to add in more light sources. So if I wanted to, I could, for example, grab all of this, duplicate all this, and I'm actually, let me change a few things here. I'm going to just put 2 after all of these ones here. Light source color 2. The only thing you don't want to bring along, you don't want to bring in that clamp. I like to take after that multiply, add here, and then drop that into our clamp. So the clamp, I like to do the clamp as the very last thing after all of the light sources have been done. So I don't know why that keeps popping up. So if I go ahead, like I said, bring that right over, you can now see we have our 2 light sources. So let me see here. I'm going to take out these 2 modifiers. Oh wait, I need that one. Let me go ahead and make this one. I'll make this one solid white for a second. You can actually immediately see that actually increased our brightness there. But if I take our light source position 2, I can take this. Let me see. Is it X and Y was forward? Let me actually do it this way. Yeah, there we go. So you can actually kind of see that kind of modified our lighting a little bit. Let me see if I can get this right. Go. Move this up 250. If I recall correctly, I believe I had it at minus 250 here. So I'm going to do minus 300. There we go. And you can see that we actually get like a second light source right there as well. And we can still modify our color as well. So I can take this. I can do like a nice bright red. Why is that not modifying? Oh wait, I did the light source position. Light source color. There we go. There we go. You can see I could still add on that like red light source color onto that second light source. Like I said, doing this can add to the complexity a little bit. I personally don't recommend doing any more than 10. For my project, I limited it at, I think it was 3 or 4. I found that was what I needed. Let me see here. Let me see if I can remember where I limited it off at. Okay, I limited it off at 2. So I actually limited it off at 2. You can have as many as you would like. Just keep in mind that the more that you add, the more that's going to add to the overall complexity of your material. So I would avoid adding way too many, especially if you're dealing with mobile hardware, because then you're just going to run into the same issues you ran into with regular dynamic lights. The way I actually like to, the way that I have found that probably works best is having multiple different materials that are bound to different light sources, and you apply to them the materials as needed. But as I mentioned, you can do this however you please. Obviously, if you're working with a desktop game, you can go crazy with it, and you can end up with a ton of different light sources. Honestly, I don't think that you will really ever need more than 2. I believe most of my materials only really use 1. But yeah, so that is our very simple fake dynamic lighting there. And that's our fake dynamic lighting. Now, obviously, as I mentioned, there's a few limitations. For example, like I said, lights will sometimes bleed through walls. And of course, you don't get any shadows with this fake dynamic lighting example. But if it's used correctly, I think that this actually makes a very interesting and unique dynamic lighting. And I think in some cases, it can make a game look even more interesting overall. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe button down below. And I'll see you guys in the next reality.